But Baalbek, which is located in Lebanon, if there was one example, one ancient site on Earth that is evidence of a lost, ancient, advanced civilization.
The notion that we could lift huge blocks with sound seems absurd to archaeologists, and yet it's there.
Towering stones heavier than jumbo jets, carved with precision that even modern cranes would fear. This is Baalbek in Lebanon, a place where the laws of engineering seem to break. How did ancient builders move blocks the size of small buildings and raise them into place without machines?
Baalbek has the largest stones that were ever quarried in human history, the largest stones that were lifted, stacked, and transported in human history.
Why did the Romans, famous for boasting about their feats, stay silent here? Hidden clues in the quarry and foundations suggest a story far stranger than expected. Could this be Lebanon's greatest mystery hiding in plain sight? Stone math that breaks a single unfinished block at the Baalbek quarry weighs around 1,500 tons. Two others nearby come in at roughly 1,000 and 1,200 tons. Inside the podium itself, 3 fitted slabs known as the trilithon each push toward 800 to 900 tons. Picture a row of jumbo jets turned into limestone and stacked into a wall. Then raise that wall 23 feet above ground and close the seams so tight you can't slip in a sheet of paper. This isn't just big. It feels categorically beyond what most of us imagine stonework can be. Size is not the only shock. The real punch lands when mass meets control. These blocks were not dropped or shoved into place. They were set with such care that the joints disappear and the faces stay true long after centuries of heat, cold, and tremors. The stone speaks the language of measurement, not brute chaos. Now compare that to what even heavy industry calls a hard day. Modern cranes can handle impressive lifts, but those records tend to crowd the lower hundreds of tons and rely on controlled work yards, custom rigging, and flawless ground prep. Moving a 1,000-ton monolith is not just a taller version of moving a 100-ton piece. The risks rise non-linearly. Friction, inertia, slope, and tiny errors begin to dominate the scene. A slight tilt becomes a runaway moment. A shallow rut in the ground becomes a trap. You don't handle a block like this. You manage a field of forces that want to fail. That is why engineers who model ancient logistics often end up with workforce counts in the tens of thousands for long drags, or with earthwork schemes that replace lifts with raised terrain. The math bullies the imagination into retreat, and yet the podium stands there, already solved, calmly ignoring our doubts. Then there's the precision that should not belong to this much weight. Oversized pieces usually forgive slop. Baalbek's giants do not. Their bedding planes read like decisions, not accidents. Their faces align in a way that makes you ask who checked the angles and who said good enough, when good enough would have ruined everything. Tolerances at this scale are expensive. Even today, even minuscule things, having very slight block tilt, can produce a point on which stress will cause a crack. The joint opens up to dust and water, making it a fault line. But here remain the seams discrete, and the planes keep their contact with gravity. It implies less about a single trick than about an entire controlled cut, controlled weight, controlled friction, but mostly controlled time. Builders were not in a hurry. They sculptured the job so that the job could be done. It is thus important that walls are stacked, because most of the time, one is transferring blocks through horizontal surface mobility. If transferring bricks between courses were perpendicularly placed, you would need to protect the edges and maintain the face and hit the desired alignment without any margin for the whole performance to come crashing down. Well, you cannot just crane this up, swing, and pray. There needs to be predictability over the motion at every inch of travel. This could suggest adding some temporary cribbing, one form of incremental lifts, some packed ramps, or some hybrid where the ground itself becomes the machine. If so, the tool was not a device, but a landscape. Soil, timber, rollers, sleds, and human bodies orchestrated to turn mass to momentum and then bleed that momentum away without harm. All this is a type of solution that leaves no noteworthy gadget aside. Only stones that look to derive their necessity from their very own. Mathematics may break, yet the stones do not. This is the dwelling of stories. The weights defy our first guess. The placements mock our shortcuts, and the finish laughs at the idea that this was done by luck. Whatever builders knew, they wisely layered it. Geology to carve the stone, geometry to make it fit, logistics to expedite the road, and patience for minimizing risk until it found no place to hide. This is why Trilithon comes forth as a thesis in limestone. It does not appeal for your belief, but demands your reverence. And right when the numbers feel most impossible, a different silence enters the room, the one from the people we expect to brag about such a win, but didn't. The Roman silence problem. Rome bragged about everything: aqueducts, colosseums, amphitheaters. If they built it, they carved it into stone and spread the story like a press release carved in Latin. The empire treated architecture as propaganda, each project a billboard of Roman genius. Yet at Baalbek, a site they renamed Heliopolis, the silence is deafening. The largest stones ever placed by human hands sit in the foundation, and the Romans, who would brag about moving a single obelisk from Egypt, left not a word. No inscription, no triumphal arch, no document describing the effort. The gap is too sharp to ignore. If these megaliths were truly a Roman victory, why would they bury their greatest boast? The most logical answer is the one nobody wants to say out loud. The Romans didn't move those stones. They inherited them. When Augustus and his successors launched their massive temple complex in the 1st century BCE, they encountered a platform already laid out in gigantic blocks. And so, like pragmatic engineers, they did what builders often do with mysterious old ruins. They adapted them. Something older was the foundation of their temple, a massive one serving as both performance and physical anchor. So there would really be no Roman footprint marking the Trilithon. Every other Roman megaproject bears the hallmarks of modularity in design thought, proportionality, and repeatability. The foundation here at Baalbek stands out from that system. It seems as though Rome had unearthed a very pleasing artifact from some other hand. This is backed by archaeology. Below the Roman strata, shards of pottery and unmistakable tool marks show a whisper of various other early cultures, and they're tool marks of a people who consistently inhabited this land long before Roman colonization. The Persians, the Phoenicians, and perhaps even Neolithic settlers, each left shadows of their presence. The Roman silence may not be an omission, but isn't that an honest way of putting it? They did not write what they did not do. Interestingly, the great temples of Jupiter, Bacchus, and Venus are celebrated in the Roman accounts, while the very Trilithon, the most staggering feat of stonework in the entire empire, goes unmentioned. Silence is one piece of evidence. When the loudest civilization in the history of the world refuses to speak about the most impressive stones in its possession, the absence becomes testimony. Either Rome wanted no part of claiming work it did not understand, or they considered it so self-evidently there before us that it was not worth noting. And that raises the real question. If not the Romans, then who? The answer may lie just beyond the temple, in the quarry, where the ambition to build bigger was frozen mid-cut. The giants' quarry walk just half a mile from the main temple platform, and the landscape changes. Here lies the quarry, a silent workshop where the impossible was born. Unlike the polished grandeur of the Trilithon, this place feels raw and half-finished, as though the builders suddenly dropped their tools and walked away. 3 colossal stones still rest there, each one bigger than the last. The most famous is the so-called Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighing close to 1,000 tons. Locals tell stories that a pregnant woman promised to reveal the secret of moving such blocks if she was cared for with food. The tale is fanciful, but it shows how long these stones have stirred awe and mystery. Then comes the Stone of the South, uncovered in the 1990s, tipping the scales at an even greater 1,200 tons. Yet, the discovery in 2014 overshadowed them all. The Forgotten Stone, buried until excavation revealed a monster weighing an estimated 1,500 tons, possibly the largest stone ever cut by human hands. To stand before it is to face ambition frozen in limestone. The marks of chisels along its sides prove deliberate craftsmanship. This was not a natural chance. Someone intended to move it, to seat it, to fit it into a project that dwarfs imagination. Yet there it lies, abandoned, as if the builders reached the limit of their methods and decided that even their genius had boundaries. Besides unfinished giants, the quarry has many other things to show. Excavating archaeologists found scattered pottery pieces around the soil, fragments dating as far back as the Persian period, more hefted centuries before Rome. Some are inscribed using cuneiform script, such that they can be dated to the 6th to 4th centuries BCE. That evidence stretches Baalbek's timeline backward and cements the proof that the quarry was not a construction of the Romans. It must have been a place of hard labor long before that, possibly for builders who dreamt in scales far larger than their tools permitted. The unfinished blocks hardly evince defeat. More so indicate alteration, change in regimes, halted projects, or dashed ambition. Each abandoned giant becomes a bookmark in history, both a reminder of vision and limitation. Local legends only deepen the aura of the quarry. Some speak of jinn, supernatural beings tasked with shaping the stones, while others believe the stone of the pregnant woman carries the power of fertility, and that to touch it can bless childbearing. These tales lie one over the other as truth and fable, but all orbit the same unresolved question: how on earth were humans supposed to move such masses that would even make modern cranes shiver? Myths give stones their magic, where histories deny such an explanation. But the quarry tells the story. The intent of the builders was actually far more than that which could be apprehended within the temple. The trilithon was never meant to be the end. Rather, it was quite simply the beginning. And here, the mystery becomes an edge. The quarry tells us of the cutting of the stones but remains silent on their transport. Legends proclaim that it was the jinn, while myths tell us it was giants, and skeptics argue for physics. This question is harder, however. What about the stones themselves? If the cutting phase is clear and the moving phase is impossible, what engineering story bridges the gap? That is the riddle science has tried and failed to solve for over a century. Engineering without a manual. When faced with Baalbek's giants, the instinct is to reach for simple solutions. The first theory many propose is wooden rollers and ramps. On paper, it seems almost obvious. Set the massive stones atop logs, roll them forward, and build earthen inclines to drag them into place. But experiments tell a different story. Archaeologists testing this method with stones a fraction of Baalbek's size quickly ran into chaos. The rollers slipped, the blocks skidded sideways, and the effort required to stabilize them ballooned beyond practical limits. The scale difference between a 40-ton Stonehenge pillar and an 800-ton trilithon slab is not linear. It's exponential. Every extra ton multiplies the problem of friction, control, and slope, until the very physics that make rollers appealing turn into an uncontrollable disaster. So the focus shifted to what Rome was famous for: crane technology. Ancient Roman engineers were masters of lifting devices, from the trispastos, a simple pulley setup for lighter loads, to the polyspastos, a beast of wood, rope, and manpower that could theoretically lift around 50 tons. In combination with tread wheels and capstans, their cranes raised obelisks, statues, and stone drums for columns across the empire. But the trilithon stones are not 50 tons. They are 15 to 20 times that size. Even the most generous reconstructions of Roman lifting towers, with multiple masts lashed together, collapse under the mass. The ropes would snap, the timber would splinter, and the entire structure would buckle before leaving the ground. Simply put, Roman cranes were brilliant, but not that brilliant. That leaves incremental and hybrid theories. Some researchers propose the use of earthen ramps, where instead of lifting a block into the air, builders raise the ground to meet it. Over time, layers of packed soil could bring the construction platform to the necessary height, allowing the block to be dragged forward rather than hoisted. Others propose the process of cribbing and jacking, the gradual lifting of the block with timbers inserted beneath until supporting layers are built up and leveled. Sleds would be lubricated with clay or animal fat and rolled by stones, allowing friction to be minimized, relying entirely on human muscle. Each particular proposal seems to indicate simply an inadequacy in its own merits. Put together, however, they paint a picture, not a miracle way, but a series of patient, repetitive techniques. One wonders whether the ancients had one way or applied them in succession, dragging, raising, stabilizing, aligning, until weight was overcome with sheer willfulness. Another issue with these reconstructions is that none addresses the question of stone placement for alignment with ultimate accuracy. Moving a stone is one thing, setting it in place with precision is another. The joints of the trilithon are not sloppy approximations. They are seams that were engineered and hold today, 2,000 years down the road. That indicates labor, measurement, control, and a level of discipline. The true accomplishment of Baalbek, some of today's engineers argue, is not the tools, but instead the organization. How would one accomplish what looks like an impossible feat at first glance? Tens of thousands of workers working in cohesion under the guidance of master planners over decades of careful sequencing. But that riddle remains. If you slide with wooden rollers, cranes fall apart, and ramps stretch the imagination, how did the builders correlate all those strategies into a unified plan? The quarry tells us how they cut. The platform tells us how they fitted it. But the middle one, how did they transfer? Were they able to choreograph moving these monsters into perfect alignment? It must remain undisclosed. And perhaps that's what disturbs us with Baalbek. It's not that we cannot come up with plausible alternatives, but no one explanation has yet provided the satisfaction we crave. The stones seem to whisper to us that somewhere there we have forgotten something essential about human engineering. One page is missing from the historical textbook, and that missing page may be hinted at not in machines, but in the very stones themselves. Etched clues, waiting to be read. Clues etched in stone. The stones at Baalbek are more than brute masses of limestone. Look closely, and they reveal details that hint at planning, technique, and connections stretching far beyond Lebanon. One of the most overlooked discoveries is the presence of blueprints carved directly into the floors of the complex. These aren't idle sketches or graffiti left by bored workers. They are scaled diagrams etched into stone surfaces, showing outlines of courtyards and architectural features. Imagine walking onto a construction site and finding the master plan literally carved into the ground. It tells us that the builders weren't improvising. They were calculating, scaling, and planning with extraordinary foresight. The fact that these floor plans are preserved in stone instead of paper or papyrus that would have decayed means the site itself became the architect's notebook. Then there's the platform masonry itself. At Podium 1, which supports the towering columns still visible today, the stonework matches a very specific style. Herodian construction, the same style used in Jerusalem during the reign of Herod the Great. Archaeologists have identified identical features, alternating headers and stretchers, drafted margins around the stone faces, and course heights that measure with uncanny precision, about 3.6 feet on average, exactly like the masonry in Herodian walls. This is not a coincidence. It suggests either a direct involvement of builders trained in the Herodian tradition, or at least a cultural and technical link between Baalbek and Jerusalem. The idea of wandering master masons or traveling guilds of builders suddenly feels less like theory and more like evidence. The techniques didn't just pop up in one place, they were shared across regions. The marks on the stone tell another part of the story. To Margaret Van S. and other researchers, the ancient cutters exploited natural fissures in the limestone and separated blocks along bedding planes with great care to minimize cracking. This was Geology 101, not stonework. The same quarrying reasoning appears in Roman aqueducts, built some distance from the source, suggesting the knowledge was not buried. The builders understood the rock, acknowledged its weaknesses, and allowed nature's geometry to work in their favor. Though these procedures won't help much in moving 1,500-ton blocks, they indicate the builders were highly rational and methodological in their approach, and not just reckless experimenters. Together, these clues, the blueprints, the Herodian fingerprints, and the intelligent quarrying work in an alternate but down-to-earth history, far removed from exotic theories. The builders of Baalbek were not gods or aliens. They were masterful engineers whose knowledge traversed borders. They relied on geology, geometry, and planned discipline to realize something that is still breathtaking today. The genius doesn't lie in one single magic trick, but rather in a craft tradition refined across generations. Yet, the all-encompassing why on this scale remains a puzzle. They would layer temple upon temple, faith after faith, for at least a couple thousand years. Tribes and nations from vastly different cultures regarded Baalbek as sacred ground. To answer that, we need to look not just at the stones, but at the civilizations that lived, prayed, and ruled around them. A site that wouldn't die. Baalbek is more than a puzzle of massive stones. It is a stage where one civilization after another performed, rebuilt, and reimagined, but never abandoned. Archaeological evidence shows settlement here stretching back over 8,000 to 9,000 years, to the Neolithic period. The earliest inhabitants left behind pottery fragments, stone tools, and traces of modest structures, marking the hilltop as special even in prehistory. Long before monumental temples, this plateau already carried spiritual weight. It was chosen and re-chosen, generation after generation, as a place that mattered. By the time the Phoenicians rose to power around 1500 to 1200 BCE, the site had grown into a full-fledged sacred center. They dedicated it to Baal, their powerful sky god, and to the goddess Atargatis, associated with love and fertility. The name Baalbek is often traced to Baal-Neb, or Lord of the Source, Orhui, referencing the natural spring nearby. For ancient peoples, water was not just survival, it was divinity. The spring at the foot of the hill gave the site an aura of life and abundance, turning Baalbek into a nexus of worship. Pilgrims would have climbed the hill not simply to honor gods, but to stand at the source of life itself. Centuries later, the Hellenistic Greeks arrived, weaving their own traditions into the city's fabric. They renamed it Heliopolis, the city of the sun, and layered their solar cults onto Phoenician foundations. To the Greeks, continuity with local traditions was a political tool, ensuring their deities felt familiar to the conquered. Thus, Baalbek's reputation as a sacred place persisted unchanged, even as new gods took the stage. Then came the Romans, and with them, one of the most ambitious religious building projects in the empire. Around the 1st century BCE, Augustus initiated massive construction that would continue for centuries. Roman architects merged Jupiter with the Phoenician Baal to create Jupiter Baal, a deity who symbolized the union of Rome and the provinces. They laid out colossal courtyards, raised marble columns that soared into the sky, and carved temples of unprecedented scale. Soon, the Temple of Bacchus and the Temple of Venus followed in grandeur, which was indeed great. For nearly 2 centuries, emperors continued to work on Baalbek into what ultimately became a pilgrimage site, rivaling the largest sanctuaries of the empire. Pilgrims traveled across the seas, entering that superlative place to view its soaring columns, gilded altars, and vast processional spaces. But history shifts. With the advent of Christianity, the city played a new role. Pagan statues were toppled and altars were destroyed, while temples were converted into churches. The destruction of pagan imagery was enforced by Emperor Theodosius, while Justinian took another route altogether by removing 8 massive columns from the Temple of Jupiter and transporting them to Constantinople for decoration at the Hagia Sophia. Even dismantling pieces of Baalbek to put there became very prestigious, for those columns were so magnificent that their place was the heart of the Byzantine Empire. In 637 CE, Muslim forces captured Baalbek. The former temples were adapted into a fortified citadel known as Qal'at Baalbek, with new towers and thickened defensive walls, and some sacred interiors repurposed as strongholds. And the Umayyad, Abbasid, Fatimid, and Ayyubid dynasties each left their fingerprints on the wall, built mosques, remade the fortress, which the sacred hill became a military site, but whose base stones have not been touched. Whatever faith and whatever kings, too precious to be deferred, had been this site. The continuity keeps haunting Baalbek. Civilizations normally have bold bragging in their constructions, which may be translated into inscriptions to ensure that such credit outlasts either the builder or the structure itself. But here, nobody clamors over building rights to the foundation megalith. Instead, it was treated by each succeeding culture as something that came from a past collating within an indeterminate mystery, too important for removal. Neolithic settlers, Phoenician priests, Roman emperors, Byzantine bishops, and Muslim generals could all find the same truth. Baalbek might be reshaped, but not erased. It is a palimpsest of human history, a layered monument in which the change lives. But the question remained in every age: who were the first bold men that would lift stones so huge, and for what purposes? All generations have looked at the Trilithon and asked, but nobody could answer it. And it's those stories, from giants and gods to aliens and lost civilizations, that keep Baalbek alive in the imagination just as much as in stone. Myth, hype, and a harder truth. When stones grow too large for easy explanation, myths rush in to fill the silence. Baalbek is no exception. For centuries, local traditions have credited the foundation blocks to Cain, cursed to wander after slaying Abel, or to Nimrod, who supposedly ordered giants to build part of the Tower of Babel on this very hill. Others point to the Nephilim, biblical giants said to walk the earth in ancient times, as the true architects of the massive platform. These legends offer answers where evidence is thin, and they survive because they satisfy a deeper need: to explain the inexplicable with stories of beings stronger, taller, or more advanced than us. Over time, the stories evolved. When giants no longer fit the worldview of later generations, new theories took their place. Ancient folklore gave way to modern myths. Lost civilizations with forgotten machines or extraterrestrials visiting Earth, equipped with technology far beyond anything human. Popular writers turned Baalbek into a centerpiece of the so-called ancient alien hypothesis, pointing to the Trilithon blocks as proof that only otherworldly power could account for their size and placement. Each theory, however different, begins from the same spark: a human mind standing in front of a 900-ton stone, wondering how on earth it ended up 23 feet in the air. The stones mock our assumptions about limits, and so the imagination takes over where logic struggles. But if we strip away the legends, the stones still tell their own story. The tool marks left in the quarry prove deliberate craftsmanship with hammer and chisel. The drafted margins and masonry style on Podium 1 mirror techniques used in Herodian architecture in Jerusalem. And perhaps most fascinating, blueprints carved directly into floors within the complex reveal that the builders thought in terms of scale drawings, measurement, and precise planning. These are not the fingerprints of giants or aliens. They are the work of human engineers using intelligence, patience, and organized labor. The truth may be less sensational, but it is no less impressive. History gives us plenty of examples where ancient people accomplished feats that looked impossible until their methods were studied. The enormous obelisks were dragged and relocated by the Egyptians. The Romans constructed aqueducts crossing valleys that last even to this time. The Persians created massive terraces as those at Persepolis. All of these marvels could have been accomplished without any futuristic machinery. Rather, all they needed was a creative application of tools, materials, and most importantly, human effort. With this said, Baalbek has some of the most extreme instances of what determination can do with size, time, and conviction. But even the best of ground theories have their gaps. Experiments using wooden rollers collapse under actual working conditions. Repros of Roman cranes fall orders of magnitude short. Even the ramp theories, which suggest dragging stones up massive embankments of packed earth, require earthwork so vast that they become impractically large, and address impractical construction in the first place. Each theory, inching closer to credibility, stumbles still short under the tremendous heft of the trilithon blocks. Such a lingering disconnect between theory and evidence keeps those myths alive, not because the evidence lacks, but rather the gap in imagination is too great. Common explanations, such as patient quarrying, careful hauling, and a lot of manpower, seem not to impress when compared to mad giants, gods, or aliens. In a way, philosopher Daniel Dennett observed that when imagination about what is possible is lacking, supernatural reasoning ends up being the default. Baalbek seems to sit right between the two worlds. The stones themselves are very much real. The space from quarry to podium is still puzzling enough to leave room for stories to grow. Perhaps a harsher truth of this is, Baalbek proves ancient builders to have been restricted as well as powerful in ways we are not usually willing to admit. They didn't have cranes of steel, hydraulic lifts, or modern engines for their work, but they had discipline, organization, and a certain level of persistence that allowed them to try what today would be unthinkable. Their achievement didn't ride on alien spacecraft. It rode on the back of tens of thousands of hands, ingenious strategies for reducing friction, wise use of natural fissures in the rock, and the conviction that what they were building mattered enough to justify decades of effort. For this reason, Baalbek endures as both a riddle and a monument. The myths might keep the wonder alive, but the stones themselves whisper something deeper. Ordinary men inspired by faith, ambition, or sheer stubbornness can create works that outlast their names and unsettle the future. The methods of the builders may have been forgotten, but their results remain, a silent challenge across time. If this breakdown sharpened the mystery and the method, like, comment, and subscribe. Tell us which part changed your mind: the quarry evidence, the Roman silence, or the Herodian fingerprints. And if you want more deep dives into ancient engineering that still schools us today, watch the next video on your screen.